I'll always remember my first memories with Sonic Adventure 2 after picking the game up at a now long defunct KB Toys. I was absolutely terrible at the game, I'll keep it short. I was maybe around 5 or 6 when I initially played the game, and while I immediately fell in love with the opening level known as City Escape, I immediately struggled with the following boss, the same results happening in the Dark Story. I shouldn't find it surprising that I was awful at playing games at such a young age, but it's funny in hindsight remembering what each level of the game was a roadblock for me. Struggling to understand where to go in emerald hunting stages, strange design choices in the mech stages, even Sonic or Shadow's levels would occasionally have moments that I remember being stuck on for quite a bit. I thank Crazy Gadget for most of those painful memories. The biggest indicator of my skills was the ranking system plastering a big ol' E or D rank for me. Rarely would I ever reach such highs like a B or even an A rank. It's not like I was bothered by this though, as long as I was able to see the end of the game, I was happy. Also, there was the Chao Garden to occupy my time when I was frustrated with certain levels, which honestly makes up a majority of my time with the game. It wasn't until a few years later learning how to use the internet that I learned of the reward you can earn for obtaining all A ranks and 180 emblems in the game. A 3D recreation of Green Hill Zone. Looking back at the level now, it's really not all that special. Hell, I'd say the costumes you unlock in the multiplayer modes are a better reward for obtaining all A ranks. But as a tie to the game's 10th anniversary, when this type of nostalgia pandering was pretty scarce, it's somewhat charming seeing a recreation like this being made. Initially watching gameplay of the stage, I was intrigued at the thought of unlocking the stage for myself, but wasn't sure if I had it in me to go for every A rank in the game. But with my summer vacation slowly creeping up, I decided to spend that free time every now and then attempting to master each level for the daunting task. While it took several months and many retries of certain stages, right as my vacation was coming to an end, I could finally say that I did indeed unlock Green Hill Zone. I felt proud for making it that far, being able to run around the stage at my own pace and take in those wonderful graphics. I then promptly moved on to other video games to occupy my time with once the amazement factor wasn't there anymore. While I didn't think of it much back then, I do believe that if it wasn't for there being any rewards for obtaining all A ranks for each stage, I not only wouldn't have gotten as good at the game as I am, but also have nearly as much of an appreciation for Adventure 2's levels as a whole. I've usually never cared for the ranking systems in other 3D Sonic games. The one other game I decided to go for an all A rank run of was Shadow the Hedgehog, because hey, I can unlock a strange hard mode version of each stage as a reward for doing so. Yeah, never again. I'd say games like Generations and Forces also don't matter as much to me due to the main stipulation being that you get to the end of a level fast enough without dying. Not to mention those levels aren't nearly as long compared to previous Sonic games. Whereas I think Adventure 2 finds a sweet spot for me in the length of its levels and replaying them for a high rank, later games like Heroes will have levels that could potentially go on for around 6 to 8 minutes, or even Unleashed with its long as hell Werehog stages. When one death can just reset all of your points, yeah, it just makes me feel more stressed than I need to be perfecting those levels. I'm sure some type of bias is there for Adventure 2, especially since it's one of my favorite games of all time, but there's just something about its different levels that just clicks for me. When playing the game with the intention of going for higher ranks, I believe that even the mech and emerald hunting stages can be fun in their own ways compared to the speed levels of Sonic and Shadow. To an extent anyways, that'll be discussed shortly. Before jumping into that discussion though, let's start with the main topic at hand. How does the ranking system in Adventure 2 work? It's at least pretty easy to understand at first glance what it is that determines your rank in a Sonic game. Enemies defeated, rings collected, and also the time it takes for you to complete said stage, all encompassed by your letter rank, ranging all the way from E to A rank, or S rank depending on which game you're playing. Occasionally, there can be an extra stipulation for gaining points, and in the case of Adventure 2, each gameplay style has their own gimmick that'll allow you to earn more points. You'll more than likely not know what it is from first glance, but there is help in the form of these neat presentations given to you by Omachao in the settings of the game, or just these boring, static PDF-style descriptions talking about the mechanics of the game in the Steam version. Each level's letter grade differs from each other, so the one downside is not knowing what high score it is you'll be aiming for. Even putting in as many hours as I have, I only have a rough estimate for what qualifies as an A rank, occasionally just having an instinct for what it is I'll earn. In our modern age of the internet though, there's resources that can help us know exactly what each high score will be aiming for from the help of Sonic fans that have recorded and detailed all this information. Thanks Sonic Retro! There's of course no better way to start in gushing about levels and its correlation with the ranking system than the Sonic and Shadow stages. Before that though, I'd want to describe the changes that Sonic featured in the jump from Adventure 1 to Adventure 2. I'll be doing this with the other characters for reasons I'll get into later. It'd be an understatement to say that Sonic in Adventure 1 is pretty insane with what you can pull off in his movement. Just the smallest incline combined with your spin dash can have you flying into the great beyond. Used correctly, you can skip entire sections of certain levels if you know where to pull these tricks off. And to be completely honest though, it's what makes Sonic so fun to play in that game to begin with. I just love being able to break certain elements of the game, though to each their own on whether this is a good thing or not. Tying this into the ranking system though would be a logistics nightmare, however, and it's why I'm perfectly fine with the ways that Sonic's gameplay was changed for Adventure 2. He's less loose in his movement, the spin dash isn't nearly as broken, and the level design has also changed to accommodate for these changes, feeling more linear in its design while also containing even more set-piece segments within its levels. With the newly introduced ranking system, I think these changes are to the benefit of what you need to accomplish to get a high score for an A rank. If you can believe it, speed is your main objective getting through Sonic and Shadow stages to get that elusive A rank.
Yeah, that makes sense!
At the same time though, the game encourages you not only to get through these levels as fast as possible, but to look cool while doing so. I mentioned earlier that each gameplay style has its own gimmick for obtaining points, and in the case of the speed levels, doing tricks throughout each level is one of the things you'll be capable of. It's part of the reason why I adore City Escape so much as the opening level. Not only is it just the epitome of doing cool shit in a video game, the small sections throughout get you accustomed to the mechanics featured in later levels, while also not acting as a penalty if you happen to fail any. The ramps are the biggest example, putting you in several scenarios to jump over and pull off some stylish tricks in the air, as well as approaching some from different angles to test your reflexes. Also included are the rows of enemies to homing attack, which the more you attack without touching the ground, the higher amount of points you'll receive. These play into their own system, with the obvious intent being that taking enemy paths will net you bonus lives or rings. The sense of danger or trickiness to these events is what makes the speed stages so thrilling, especially learning how to always take the more rewarding paths of the game. There's a good handful of trickier, fun diversions the game throws at you besides the ramps, like the hoops you can jump through in Pyramid Cave. These only appear in the drawn-out linear pathways, and while it's not the most well-designed thing to navigate, I find seeing how many I can jump through to be a pretty fun challenge. Probably the most infamous trick event is featured in Metal Harbor, requiring the player to reach the top of the soon-to-be-launched rocket towards the end of the level. It requires good precision navigating the corridors, and you're always going to reach the top with less than a second to spare. Even with potential screw-ups, the level is so quick to run through that having to reset and attempt another time I don't find to be a problem.
That was cool!
I've only covered Sonic's stages so far, so it should go without saying that these gameplay gimmicks also apply to Shadow. The main difference in the tricks I noticed they have you pull off with Shadow is that he has a lot of rail grind events compared to Sonic. Skyrail is the most apparent with this, and it's something that you wouldn't find that you could do with how subtle it is compared to the ramps featured in Sonic stages. Right as you reach the end of a rail, jumping off will have Shadow do some flippy flips in the air, and it will net you however many points. Besides this, there's not many other trick events that Shadow features in his levels compared to Sonic, so if anything, his levels rely more on ring collecting and enemy chains to rack up points. This is still fun of course, especially when you decide to figure out unintended ways the developers wanted you to navigate the level design. I hinted earlier about my distaste for Crazy Gadget, and for good reason. This level took me a couple months back in the day just because I was confused on how to handle the switching gravity puzzle. Long story short, I ended up finding an entirely different route from just making some somewhat dangerous jumps that still brought me to the switch to open up the end goal. To this day, I still do this method for completing the stage and only do the proper route if I go out of my way to. I'm sure I have plenty of other forgotten memories of my first time learning other stages and attempting unintended methods of getting through them, but that's all old history and I don't know if I can recollect any of those memories. I love playing all the speed levels now, and I find myself glad that I've only gotten better at running through them. Though, just because I enjoyed the speed levels the most, and they're undeniably the best part of the game, that doesn't mean I don't find any enjoyment out of the two other styles of gameplay. It goes without saying that emerald hunting and especially the mech stages are a form of contention on whether or not these stages are actually fun, especially in comparison to Adventure 1. Honestly, I don't mind these stages as alternatives to the speed stages. Actually, I'd say these stages benefited the most from the ranking system and allowing me to appreciate them over the years. Or maybe that's just me tolerating some of the more bullshit moments these levels feature. At least for the mech stages anyway. We'll get to my opinions on emerald hunting shortly. What was initially a fun, albeit short 3D run-and-gun style of gameplay featured by Gamma in Adventure 1, it was turned into a slightly more clunky and platform-driven run-and-gun style of level design. While you thankfully don't have to deal with the weird time limit that plagued Gamma's levels, getting used to the controls of the mech and SA2 and some of the pot shots that you'll be receiving in levels can be a bit of a turnoff. If you're able to put up with these grievances, however, you'll be able to find enjoyment in what I believe makes the mech stages as fun as they are for me.
Now you know why I am the best!
Being able to cause as much destruction as possible. The main gimmick of the mech stages is chaining together lock-on shots onto as many enemies and objects as possible. The amount of points you get will vary, but the max amount is 11 for you to get that elusive perfect point combo. Chaining together hits is key for high ranks, and I'm glad that it's such an easy task in doing so. Your charge shots have no limits to their range, so as long as you get that lock on, they can even go through terrain so long as it reaches its target. A lot of the mech levels are fairly linear in comparison to other stages, but I'd say that's to the benefit of your mech being able to find enemies and objects to destroy as quickly as possible. No stage gets you accustomed to this idea than Eggman's third stage, Metal Bed. There's just a crazy amount of stationary gun robots required to lock on for you to get a high score. It's not even a particularly hard stage outside of random jets shooting bombs at you, but it's just such a fun time running through and plowing through as many enemies as possible. It's perfectly fitting for Eggman in that regard, just causing mayhem and feeling like an imposing force on the enemies around you. They certainly have a more hectic energy than Tails' stages. Not to completely disregard his stages though, they still feature the same amount of goofy stuff and trials to pull off, it just feels more natural coming from Eggman's POV. Fitting then that Eggman's final level, Cosmic Wall, is probably the ultimate test in how well you can use your mech. The score required for an A rank is the highest in the game, requiring you to earn over 80,000 points. For whatever reason, this was the only stage in the jump from the Dreamcast to get an increase to the amount of points needed for an A rank, and the only reason I can think of is not only in how long this stage is, but also the crazy amount of high lock-on chains you can do. Seriously, there's rarely a moment in this stage where you can't at least lock onto 3 objects at once. This is honestly the best example of a level in the game that I think tries to push your knowledge on how well to utilize the mechanics of a specific gameplay style, and it's a pretty fun stage to run through, long length withstanding. Replays in attempting to get an A rank can get a bit tiring, sure. I remember this being one of the levels I got stuck on getting the A rank for, but it's such a good culmination of the elements I like about the mech stages that I just can't find myself hating this one. Not to mention the song is also pretty damn good. Overall, I really do enjoy the mech stages in Adventure 2 and the ways that the ranking system is intertwined with the level design. Whether they actually belong in a Sonic game can be up for debate, but if any gameplay style had to be brought over from Adventure 1, then Gammas would be high up there for me. Now, the changes that the Emerald Hunting stage is featured in the jump to Adventure 2, that's a harder pill to swallow. I will admit, compared to the other gameplay styles, the Emerald Hunting stages were never a favorite for me. They were always the most difficult for me to get through growing up, and my better experience playing through them now comes from the amount of trial and error I put into them. It really isn't up for debate that treasure hunting in Adventure 1 was just an overall faster and debatably more fun experience. People always bring up being able to see more than just one emerald piece at a time, but for me it's more so that the radar in Adventure 1 would pulsate faster the closer you got to an emerald piece, something that returns in Adventure 2 but is in a more limiting state. More than anything, your ability to A-rank these stages will require you to have full knowledge of the level layout if you want to get any good at them. Your ability to collect all 3 pieces as fast as possible will all but guarantee you getting a high score in each stage. The only gimmick to obtaining points this time around is the time it takes finding each piece and the usage of the hint system monitors throughout. Now, before doing research for this video, I was always under the assumption that you weren't allowed to use the hints whatsoever due to the high amount of points you get for not doing so. You guarantee either a perfect or awesome score using 0 hints, and with just barely making the cutoff point for A ranks, I had essentially played these stages without ever trying to use the hints, even in just casual playthroughs. This is not true in the slightest. While you shouldn't be using up hints all the time, using them sparingly to get an idea of an emerald piece's location is a reliable strategy so long as you make it to said area as quickly as possible. It's insane that I'm only now realizing this after about a decade or so, but these stages are probably the ones I've spent the most time theorizing how certain elements work in tandem with the ranking system. For example, I've been thinking about why the emerald radar is limited like it is, and the only theory I have is due to how hint monitors function. The way points are tied to your usage of them and how many you receive for finding an emerald shard, the dev team might have thought it would be too easy finding each emerald in a level for a high rank, or just too confusing receiving hints for all emeralds at once. If I'm somehow correct in this, then I guess you can blame the ranking system for why these stages are the way they are, which, damn, I guess it would explain some things. The secret meaning for why the emerald hunting stages are as trash as they are. Even without the help of the hint system, it's still in your best interest to understand the layout of each level. They can get pretty big and also feature a lot of side goodies such as hidden rings or item capsules. I understand needing to have rings and such for these levels, but it's funny that these are unnecessary and which you'll be needing to get an A rank. Playing the role of a treasure hunter though, it makes sense that there'd be secrets like this in these levels, so I give it a pass. Sometimes you might not even explore every area of a given level due to the RNG being in your favor and giving you emerald shards quickly. One of the unfortunate side effects of these stages though, it could be a strategy to just reset the level and get new emerald spawns in the hopes you find them quicker. I wasn't expecting this gameplay style to give me the most trouble, but I find it somewhat fascinating just looking into the weird quirks of these stages. I like the stages thematically and the music featured. I think Rouge's music doesn't get enough love, but they do have the most to put up with in grievances towards obtaining A ranks. Crazy Gadget is one thing, Mad Space will always be a pain in the ass to play through no matter how good I get at playing the game. Some of the sandbox styled level design is what makes playing either character a bit weird, especially due to being accustomed with the more linear design of other stages in the game. Though considering Adventure 1 just ripped sections of Sonic's levels for Knuckles to run through, yeah, I guess it's for the best they made actual level themes for him and Rouge. Even with the focus on linear level design, I think the game does a good job in still having a decent amount of hidden items or pathways within each stage, especially when connected to the 4 extra missions each one features. I find these missions to be somewhat underrated in the experience that is Adventure 2, especially when they can help with getting the player acquainted with each level. Your first 2 missions of collecting 100 rings and finding a lost Chao are simply ranked by how fast you can complete the objective. For collecting 100 rings, knowing where optional ring capsules are hidden or coming across secret rooms can help make the task much faster in certain levels than others. Hey, guess it gives more purpose to the loads of rings you can find in the treasure hunting stages. Lost Chao missions are almost always locked behind these hidden melody statues that are also sometimes tucked away from the beaten path. Once you figure out the location of one, the mission becomes fairly easy in racing to the Chao quickly as possible. Now, before attempting either mission, it's best that you take things a bit slow in understanding where each objective is located and the chance you zoom right by rings or the location of a statue. I actually remember enjoying these missions as a way of being able to relax and just stroll through any given area. Being able to try out new routes has led me to rediscovering parts of the games that I sometimes ignore entirely. I like the small section in Pyramid Cave, for example, where you instinctively railgrind over an open pit of enemies and rings to collect. You also have diggable walls or structures you can interact with in old treasure hunting stages thanks to new upgrades. Probably one of the strangest discoveries I've come across in this game though is this lone spring underneath a platform in Tails' Mission Street stage, which seems to act as a last-ditch effort to save yourself if you happen to fall off in the specific area. It's strange because as far as I know there's no other spring like this in the stage. Of course, I also have to talk about the remaining 2 missions of running through each stage with a time limit a la Green Forest and the challenging hard mode missions. Time attack missions, while slightly nerve-wracking, don't feature any changes to what you'll be playing through, so you can play these stages how you've normally been and get a high rank no problem. The hard mode missions are a fun challenge in my opinion, adding just the right amount of differences between levels to make them different from your original run through them. Honestly, if you've been able to tackle what the game has thrown at you up until this point, then these switch-ups will be no problem in attempting high rank playthroughs. especially if it's something like the emerald hunting stages, which is placed the randomized locations of the emeralds with hard-to-solve puzzles in obtaining each emerald piece, which, if you decide to even look up the methods in getting them, they will turn these hard mode stages into the easiest versions of these levels. I really don't know what they were thinking with these.
Yeah, I feel good.
While on the topic of questionable things, there is one strange method of getting an A rank in Adventure 2 that I haven't touched on yet, and it has to do with ring collecting. You see, as an alternative to the methods required in getting a high score for each level, collecting enough rings is another method in guaranteeing yourself an A rank. All rings, to be exact. There's nothing in the game that explains this, but if you go out of your way to slowly collect every ring that a level has to offer, you'll receive a perfect message that will give you an A rank regardless of your skills in every other objective. Only one problem. It's nearly impossible to do it this way. As a part of the ranking system, it's important that I actually talk about this mechanic, but I should stress that this method should only be done as a fun challenge for anyone who wants to attempt it. You see, while a fun idea to take things at a leisurely pace as you collect rings, you'll slowly learn that not every level allows you to collect all rings featured, even if the game tells you otherwise. The reason for this is some rings can only be collected in certain missions, and while those rings become accessible, others don't, so it is quite literally impossible to get a perfect ring score on some stages without cheating. I even tried finding any videos attempting to obtain the perfect ring counter on every stage, and so far I've only come across one video from someone that not only relied on tool-assisted tactics to get certain rings, they were only able to obtain whatever was feasibly possible in the level. Let me tell you, they love teasing you with the idea you were only, say, 10 or even 1 ring off from a perfect score. Unfortunately for me, I chose 3 different levels between each playstyle before watching this video to determine if I'd be able to reach that perfect ring counter. While I got lucky with my picks for Sonic and Eggman, I wasn't so lucky in my pick with Rouge. It's so strange determining whether or not they wanted to incorporate this perfect ring method as a true alternative with the way some rings are implemented. For example, in Metal Harbor, I kept coming up just 1 ring short, curious as to where I kept missing 1 ring. Turns out they just placed 1 lone ring at the top of this platform out of your view, somewhere I would have never considered looking. A run through one of Eggman's stages was much easier thanks to the linearity and enclosed space of the area, though I still took my time running through as a precaution. The strangest part of the ring counter in the ranking screen is that the max amount will actually increase depending on if you get bonus rings that weren't within the base level's design. This means any rings obtained from checkpoints or dug up ring capsules in the treasure hunting stages don't count towards your ring total, even though the limit itself increases. This is what I ended up running into in Eggman's stage a couple of times, and also Rouge's, which you see I ended up reaching the max ring counter after digging up some bonus rings, but unfortunately that didn't matter. Overall, this perfect ring method of getting A ranks is so all over the place that I wouldn't recommend you try doing this challenge unless you actually look up which stages that it's possible to obtain all rings in.
Oh yeah!
Implementations such as this and other mechanics that were incorporated into the ranking system of Adventure 2 is something that I wish had more documentation or interviews from the dev team of how they came up with some of their ideas. I tried looking up past interviews on Sonic Retro as well as other methods, but nothing ever came up. For being the first game to introduce the system and how it continued to evolve over several games, I'd like to know which ideas the dev team wanted to incorporate into Adventure 2, or why they changed certain mechanics in future Sonic games. I should go ahead and say that I don't have intentions of disparaging the ranking systems of other Sonic games and the way they function, cause I wouldn't be surprised if there's mechanics within there and its ties to the level design that I haven't spent nearly as much time practicing with. Adventure 2 just has something special about it that personally clicks with me, an enjoyment that only continues to grow the more I get older. That's part of the fun with many Sonic games really, being able to replay levels over and over until you slowly get better with being able to keep up with their fast and sometimes busted gameplay. Even if my opinion didn't drastically change by replaying the game with this video in mind, I'm glad that I can continue to enjoy even the weirdest aspects of this game. This is also my first time messing with mods for both adventure games, which you may or may not have noticed I used in footage throughout. They were all purely visual or audio changes, however, since anything I changed in regard to gameplay wouldn't represent the accurate experience a majority of people grew up with, and that wouldn't have sat well with me. Sonic Adventure 2, one of my favorite games of all time with many enjoyable features. Of course, I'm only talking about the Chao Garden. No contest, the best part of the game. Have you seen how adorable these guys are?
Yeah,